at the core of Hatha Yoga is this practice of Mula Bandha. Okay? Now, that doesn't necessarily explain to us what it actually is. Okay? So, let's start to unravel this idea of what we're practicing in Hatha Yoga and then bring it back circle in terms of what it actually feels like in the body. So through Hatha Yoga, we're pulling the body apart for insight. Okay? And this is what we do as we practice. So we're using the body as a raw material to be able to look in, and as we start to twist it and knead it like dough and work with the breath and the body and the mind, we start to undo the conditioning that has formed through years of habits and developing survival strategies to be able to exist and survive here in the world. So essentially we're deconditioning the body and the tissues of the body because the tissues have started to absorb all of the wounds of our past and our trauma. And effectively it's become a map. So it's the physical representation of all of our personality patterns, or all of our habits, which we call samskaras, which are basically grooves. So samskara comes from sam, which is from the word sum, or com, from community, and scar, which is like, what a scar is. So it's the sum of our scars. And this is what we find in the body as we start practicing, that our wounds and our habits start to come up. Okay? Now, as we start to pull apart all of this stuff that's been bound together, causing us to not see things the way they actually are, or what we call avidya, or ignorance, which is effectively mistaking the map for the territory, or mistaking what your mind tells you something is for what it actually is. So your opinions or your projections of what something is, so your ideas of Mula Bandha, so what you think it is, cannot possibly be what Mula Bandha actually is. So that's a core axiom of Hatha Yoga, which is whatever it is you think. So if you think this, you know what this is, it's not that. Which makes yoga really quite a slippery practice. Yoga teachers are pretty elusive when you ask them questions because it's really difficult to pin them down for a real proper answer. So the more that we start practicing, the more that we start to see that there are not clearly defined, definitive boxes that we can actually start to categorize things into, the more we see that there's shades of grey. Now, through this practice, we have to explore opposites. So we have to begin, as we look into the body, exploring the very nature of our world, which exists in what we call duality. Okay? So duality would be the world of opposites we live in. Hot, cold, male, female, up, down, in, out, me, you, black, white. You can come up with a million more. So this gives us contrast and depth to our world. Okay? So it's through the practice of Hatha Yoga, or Hakaram and Takaram, sun and moon yoga, sun and moon is another one, that we explore the world of opposites. Okay? And the way that we do this through our yoga practice, the most easily accessible complementary opposites are the inhale and the exhale. Okay? So the inhale and the exhale, the inhale is what we call pranic, and it rises and spreads. So it's said to be, if you were to use the metaphor of a tree, the prana is the branches that reach up and spread out towards the sun, that reach out and up and lift, and are enthusiastic in the spring and the summer. Okay? And then in the autumn and the winter, the leaves and the flowers drop off and the fruit falls, and everything gets drawn back into the trunk, and all the energy is put back into the roots through the autumn and the winter. And the autumn and the winter is said to be apanic in nature. So apana is the roots of the tree. So the roots are burrowing down, grounding to get nourishment out of the earth. Okay? And this is the exhale pattern. So the exhale grounds us into the earth. So at the very end of the exhale, that's like the seed, the root seed point of a tree. And then as we inhale, energetically, there's a rising and spreading energy. Okay, and you don't have to take my word for this. You can actually feel it in your own bodies. So the exhale associated with apana associated with exhaling makes us squeeze down and become really, we really exhale. And then as we inhale, there's a rising and spreading energy. And what happens is, those of us who can get, because we can get stuck in these two patterns of breathing. So if we're an extremist and all we do is exhale, and we've been taught in a yoga class that we have to exhale more and really focus on the end of the exhale, and we get really, really, really introverted and inside ourselves. And right at the end of that exhale, which is where most of our deepest fears reside. Okay, but we miss the inhale and we're not inhaling properly. We can get very introverted, and the world can get very small, and we don't want to meet other people. We can get quite depressed. Okay, and then the other side of that is the inhale, because when the inhale is given too much bias, we get addicted to everything that feels good, and everything's wonderful and shiny, and I just want to have my heart open. And I'm terrified of exhaling, because when I exhale, I might actually have to go into my darker shadow side. So these are the two energies that we play with, inhaling and exhaling, prana and apana. And the reason why this is important is because Mula Bandha, so the practice of Mula Bandha, is actually the uniting of the inhale and the exhale at the center of the pelvic floor. So it's said that Mula Bandha, when the prana and apana unite at the base of the spine, the central axis opens up and consumes time and space, which is to say that your concepts of time and space, which are all in your mind, they're all in your perceptions, completely dissolve. And you actually start to experience the yoga that is described in the books, so the union. So we start to unite these seemingly opposite complementary patterns. And this is what we're doing with Mula Bandha. We're tying together the inhale and the exhale pattern so that we don't flick between an inhale and an exhale as if we're like bipolar. So we go into full inhale pattern and then full exhale pattern. So that what we have to do is we actually have to play with these two phases of the breath, so that we can have an inhale and an exhale and the best qualities of both simultaneously. And how do we do that? I'm glad you asked. In order to experience what we call Mula Bandha through our practice, okay, and I'll talk anatomically in a moment about where we're going to locate this, okay, but I just want to set the ground rules before we actually start practicing anything. Because otherwise you're not going to have any idea why you're even doing what you're doing. Okay? So, this is the cornerstone of Hatha Yoga. Okay? So if you've been asleep for the last 20 minutes, wake up. Okay? And this is important. So, the inhale, the heart belongs to the inhale. Okay? So when we inhale, the heart opens and lifts. Okay? And it's free, maybe it's free. It's not really free. Okay. But you get an illusion of freedom with the inhale. Okay. And then on the exhale, the home base of the exhale is the pelvic floor. So the end of the exhale, if you really fully exhale, you'll take the attention all the way down into your tailbone. And you'll feel a contraction and a toning at the end of the exhale in your pelvic floor. Okay, so two home bases. Pelvic floor at the end of the exhale, heart on the inhale, like two ends of a stick. Okay, great. So, if you really, really exhale and you do it deliberately, you'll find the pelvic floor. And the pelvic floor, on a gross physical level, is going to be what we're going to refer to as Mula Bandha. Or at least that's what you can practice. That's the area you can use as a focal point for practice to be able to practice Mula Bandha. Okay? So if you do nothing else in this workshop, you can just actually exhale all the way down until you feel some tissues between your sitting bones come together. So what happens when we inhale and the heart lifts is the pubic bone drops. Okay? So the pubic bone drops forwards and down when we inhale. If you inhale, you don't have to take my word for that. Let's all stand up. this has become a little bit overly theoretical. So if you stand up, make your feet about hips width apart. Okay. So you can still take notes if you want. So if we focus on it, so if we take an inhale, okay, we start to feel the inhale rising and spreading. What should naturally happen is that the pubic bone should drop slightly to make the front body long. Okay? It might not for you, by the way. It's fine if it doesn't, but this is just theory currently. Okay? So as you inhale, the pubic bone drops and the heart floats. Okay? Now when you exhale, to start exhaling, as you start exhaling, you should feel the ribs pull down, the tummy muscles tone, and that will pull the pubic bone up, and you should feel the tailbone drop down slightly. Yeah. Okay, good. That was an agreement there. Not necessarily agreement on the first one. So let's do the up. Now when we inhale, we lengthen the front body, right? Because we've got to make space for the inhale. What has to happen to the pubic bone to do that? It has to go down. Yes? The heart floats up. So the pubic bone drops on the inhale, and the tailbone drops on the exhale. Are we in agreement for that? At least in theory. Okay, great. Now why is this important? So, the muscle that is associated with Mula Bandha, okay, so on an anatomical level, Mula Bandha is associated with the pelvic floor. Now the pelvic floor is a group of muscles, okay? It's not just one muscle that resides at the base of the pelvis. Instead, it's a group of muscles, and most specifically, it's the muscle we call the PC muscle. Pubococcygeus, okay? So pubo, pubic bone, coccyx, tailbone, pubococcygeus. So that would indicate that that muscle runs from here back to here like a hammock. Yes?
No, we have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay, so this muscle that we're associating with Mula Bandha actually attaches the front and the back of the pelvis. Or at least the front of the pelvis to the end of the tailbone. So, when the tailbone goes down, the pubic bone comes up, and when the pubic bone goes down, the tailbone comes up. If we're existing in a space whereby everything goes from one extreme to the other. Okay? Now, initially through practice, we play with the extremes of this practice. So we exaggerate that movement when we drop the pubic bone to go into a forward bend, hopefully. And then on the back bend, we exaggerate the tailbone going down. Now what you'll notice is these are actually the exact opposite movements to the ones associated with. So exhaling is often associated with forward bending. Right? So when you exhale, you would usually go into a forward bend. And inhaling is almost always associated with back bending, right? So I'm reducing this practice to those two movements. Okay. Now in Hatha Yoga, this is called Mula Bandha, because Mula Bandha is the relationship, or at least the physical practice of Mula Bandha is the relationship between the pubic bone and the tailbone. Okay. So when we contract the PC muscle, so when it contracts, okay, which is when somebody's giving you that instruction of squeeze your anus. The reason why that's really useful is because the PC muscle, it's like a six-pack muscle, okay? So, have you seen pictures of your six-pack muscle? Yeah? So it's like these strips that run down. It's like these, it looks a little bit like those ice cubes, the bags you can make into ice cubes, you know, when you pour the water in and they go boom, 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 boom. It's a bit like that. So there's little packets of muscle connected by connective tissue, tendons, okay? But there's actually two strips of muscle that can actually separate. So women when they're pregnant, often they can have this separation of the abdominal muscles, like this. And in the pelvic floor, the muscle, basically just like a highway with two lanes, actually goes around the anus. So when you squeeze the anus, it's not the anus that you're looking to contract in this practice. You're trying to get the PC muscle to activate by squeezing the muscle closest to it, because the connective tissues are so intertwined. So when you squeeze the anus, it switches on your PC muscle. Okay? Now, when it contracts, the pubic bone and the tailbone move closer together, closer towards each other. Okay? So what this means is that when the tailbone drops, the PC muscle is pulling the tail down, and when the pubic bone drops, it's pulling the pubic bone down. And it's a little bit like a relationship where you're chasing someone who doesn't necessarily want to be caught. And then that person turns around and chases you and you don't necessarily want to be caught. And what we want is we want both the pubic bone and the tailbone to both go down when we practice. So we practice vinyasa, those of us who practice vinyasa, okay, to intelligently use the inhale and the exhale. So for example, in a forward bend, you might drop the pubic bone on the exhale and the tailbone drops down, okay? Now as it goes down, it lets you into the pose. Now I keep my pubic bone down as I inhale and drop my tailbone, and as my tailbone goes down, it goes towards the pubic bone, which is the practice of Mula Bandha. So my tailbone goes down, my pubic bone goes down, and my pelvic floor gets really excited and draws in and up. So when we start to manage our pelvic floor, just by inhaling and exhaling, we start to manipulate the pubic bone and the tailbone so that every movement starts to come from the center of the body. Okay? So effectively, so this is contextualizing the practice of Mula Bandha in terms of your physical asana practice. This is